Welcome to Unfiltered and Unstoppable with Romesburg. Real strategies for real advisors, a podcast that dives into what it takes to scale a thriving financial practice. Each week, we'll discuss actionable strategies, tools, and insights to keep you ahead in today's financial landscape. From innovative products and powerful marketing tactics, you'll get unfiltered truth and unstoppable strategies. Let's get started by building your unstoppable financial practice today.
All right. Welcome back to Unfiltered and Unstoppable. I am your host, Rob Romesburg, and today's episode is not about markets. It's not about performance. It's not about products. It's something far more uncomfortable, and we are going to be talking about today why good retirement plans fail. Um, and we're not saying they don't fail loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Meaning, once again, it's not about the performance. It's about many other risks, many other factors that come into play to where the performance isn't really the factor here at all, or necessarily the investments. We're talking about real retirement risks. Because here's the truth that most people don't like to hear. Um, Most retirement failures aren't caused by bad investments. They're caused specifically by unaddressed risks, and those unaddressed risks compound over time. And the thing that makes this even more frustrating is that most advisors, definitely experienced ones, knows that these risks exist. Clients have heard about them. They've nodded along. They said, "Yeah, we should really look at that." And then guess what? Nothing happens uh, until, unfortunately, that risk becomes reality. And so today we're going to go through the six primary risks, and more importantly, how to handle them, how to prevent them. And we're not going to be going through this as a checklist, um, not as generic education, meaning what are they? But we're going to be going through this as a retirement stress test. Um, and here's the thing, this stress test, they don't predict the future. They really uh, reveal where things break under pressure. And that's really your primary role as the advisor, specifically as a great advisor. What we're going to be going through today is showing you how a strong retirement plan should survive six stress points, not 11, not 20, six. Now, are there other stress points out there? Yes. However, these are the primary six. These are the risks that show up the most often. These are the ones that do the most damage, and these are the ones that, for whatever reason, even though they do the most damage, they are the ones that are most consistently underestimated. And here's what matters most about all of these risks is, unfortunately, they don't live in isolation. And what that means is it's like the domino effect. And unfortunately, when one shows up, the rest will definitely follow. Not maybe, definitely. So as you're listening here today, as an advisor, and specifically advisors that are working with pre-retirees and retirees, don't sit here and ask, "Do I understand these?" Sit here and wonder and ask to yourself and your firm and your team, do we actually really truly stress test our clients' plans against these risks? Are their plans actually being stress tested against these risks? So let's walk through the six. Number one, longevity risk, outliving the plan. Longevity risk isn't necessarily about living a long time. It's much more about living longer than your plan was designed to support. Yes, longevity is what we're talking about, but more specifically, what does the longevity of the plan look like? And is it designed to support the longevity of your client or clients? The generic thing that I see out there is that most people talk about or mentally plan for retirement until they hit 85. But here's the actual reality is that one spouse, if you're dealing with a married couple, obviously, the reality says that at least one spouse will live often into their 90s. So that could be an extra decade. Here's the thing also, that's usually the most expensive decade of someone's life, the last 10 years of their life. So, as you know, healthcare increases. Um, all of a sudden, now we have different care decisions that are showing up. All of a sudden, that flexibility that I had all of those previous years, that all goes out the window. So, the thing is that you might hear from your clients, I don't plan on living that long. Well, okay, I great, or I don't think I'll live that long. Why that's misleading is because once again, longevity planning isn't about you necessarily. Longevity planning is about the probability. It's taking in factors. Because once again, someone in the household usually lives longer than the first person or lives longer than expected. So how you reframe that and how you specifically present it is, here's the thing, Bob and Mary. We don't plan for the average outcome. We plan for the most damaging one. We're hoping to protect against that. Another way is that the risk isn't necessarily about living a long life. The risk is funding a long life with a short plan. That's what we're trying to not do. So a longevity stress test is is about testing whether income is designed or merely assumed. So longevity will test your plan on whether it's actually designed or whether it's assumed. So that was risk one, longevity. Risk two, sequence of returns risk. This is something that I like to say bad timing will create permanent damage. And sequence of returns risk is one of the most misunderstood, one of the most underestimated risks in retirement. And it's also it can be a little difficult to explain as well and demonstrate. So I'm going to break it down here, hopefully to simplify it. Um, the, the unfortunate part is sequence of returns risk, when broken down very simply, it could sound very academic or very simple. That's an easy solution. Actually, it's not. It's one of the most difficult risks out there because you're looking at more than likely two retirees, the same average return, same starting balance. You could see where one of those individuals thrives and one of those individuals runs out of money. And the, when a client or a prospect sees that at first, their reaction might be disbelief. How is that possible? That doesn't even make sense. Well, here's why. It's not, as you know, with sequence of returns, it's not the average return that matters the most in retirement. It's the order of the returns, or when do those returns actually happen, right? And so losses early in retirement, they do something that the market never ever talks about. That permanently changes the math of your plan. So, to break it down simply, when someone is accumulating, volatility is uncomfortable, frustrating, but it's manageable because we're accumulating. But when we've triggered income, when we are taking withdrawals out of that plan, volatility is absolutely destructive and can be permanent. Because every dollar withdrawn during a downturn is a dollar that never gets a chance to recover. That's my favorite way to put this. Every dollar that's withdrawn during a downturn is a dollar that never gets a chance to recover. That's the sequence of returns risk right there. Now, what you're thinking, especially if you've been doing this a long time, is you know what? The markets always come back. The markets over time always performs. 100% correct. And you are not wrong. Markets do recover. The dangerous part, however, your clients' portfolios may never get a chance because it's about the timing of the market. Yes, over time, 20, 25, 30 years, markets will recover. But does their portfolio more specifically have the chance to get that, participate in that recovery? And why that belief is so risky is when your clients are taking income, losses will happen, but the withdrawals continue. And then at that point in time, what happens is their shares are sold at depressed values. And so even if the markets do rebound later, the portfolio overall is working with less capital. And that's why, specifically why two identical plans can end very differently because one maybe had bad timing early and the other one didn't. And unfortunately, there's not a rewind button, as you know. So this is where you need to shift the conversation, not with charts, not with averages, but with logic. Logic is key here. It's not what the market does. It's specifically what the market does when you are taking income. And that single sentence, once again, that's what puts it all into perspective. Because we're not talking about performance. We're talking about durability. We're talking about timing. And the sequence of return risk shows up when the income depends entirely on selling assets. Um, there's no buffer between the market and the paycheck. And the risk also is when the client just assumes that the market will recover and that'll fix everything. And the recovery, as we've already pointed out, doesn't undo the damage, right? Because you're doing withdrawals while we're suffering losses, and that's all at the wrong time. So averages don't matter when timing is wrong. Another way to say that is that the market can recover, but your income might not. So, what is the sequence of returns risk, or what is it really testing? Sequence risk isn't testing the market. It's not. It's testing. Sequence return risk is testing the structure of the plan. So, does the income have shock absorbers? Is there a non-market source? Is there a way to avoid selling in bad markets? Or does everything depend on markets cooperating every single year? Because retirement plans that survive volatility, those aren't lucky. Those are designed. So sequence of returns risk is number 2. Number 3, inflation, or something that I like to title the silent bleed. It seems a little violent, but very accurate. Inflation by itself won't crash the plan. It can definitely erode them for sure. So, as you are very well aware, I'm sure, a $60,000 lifestyle today can easily become $100,000 later in retirement. I mean, we're looking at inflation today like, oh my gosh, when's the last time you've taken a family of four out to eat fast food? I mean, that's a $60 bill easy. Just 10 years ago, that was $30. And, your clients, especially conservative ones, might be saying something along the lines of, we don't spend that much. I get it. However, that may not be accurate because guess what? Over my lifetime, I've been alive 46 years, I've seen my spending patterns change. I've seen healthcare rise significantly, and I've seen the choices out there shrink of some of those healthcare options. So this isn't necessarily about spending more in retirement. It's about being able to make sure that you're able to buy the same life that you have today later. So keeping your lifestyle that you have today later on in life. And unfortunately, inflation isn't the type of thing to where it announces itself. It unfortunately just shows up in smaller choices and many, many, many other choices. And this is exactly where many plans quietly fail. So let's just reset this just for 1 second here. So if you're an advisor, you're listening, I'm sure you talk about inflation and you bring it up and you discuss it. The issue isn't awareness. The issue is the integration of the plan being inflation protected, meaning longevity plus inflation plus sequence risk compound. That's what I mean by the domino effect. This is what will break a plan, not inflation by itself necessarily, but if we were also outliving what the plan planned for, we also have some downturns in the market and we have some sequence risk. And now we have inflation on that. That's what will kill a plan. So that was number three. Number four, tax risk. Paying more than necessary. And I know many of you out there listening right now, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how tax risk can be one of the biggest surprises in retirement. Uh, Taxes aren't new, right? I mean, we've had them our whole lifetime. The issue is the way income is taxed changes, meaning increases, different tax laws, different loopholes, and many retirees assume that their tax burden will naturally go down once they stop working, right? That's what they assume. But unfortunately, when retirement shows up, that many times the opposite happens because now we're triggering Social Security. Maybe if I'm fortunate enough to have a pension, my pension now kicks in. All of a sudden, these things called RMDs, required minimum distributions, come into play. I mean, required, you were forced to take them. And then all of a sudden, that income that was once spread out is stacked. And what that means is you're taxed on taxed on taxed more than ever. And I guarantee you've heard this many times before from your clients when they're thinking about retirement is, you know, I'm not really that concerned about it because I'll be in a much lower tax bracket when I retire. That's the great assumption. And you know what? That belief makes sense on the surface because all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm not getting a paycheck anymore. I don't have any overtime, no bonuses. That just those kind of generic thought processes. But but retirement income doesn't simplify. It layers. And why that assumption is wrong oftentimes because here's what actually happens in retirement. You are now taking retirement income from accounts that have been tax deferred for years and years and years. Want that money. The IRS wants that money. All of a sudden, you're taking additional income from taxable accounts. You're being taxed on your Social Security income. You've triggered that pension. So individually, each of those income streams seems manageable for sure. I get it. But when they're combined, they interact in a way that many clients that never see coming. So, like we already said, Social Security becomes taxable. All of a sudden, the RMDs are pushing you into an income higher than expected. Medicare premiums now increase, not because your clients did anything wrong. I mean, this is their money, right? But the issue is their withdrawals weren't coordinated, right? They weren't planned. So this is where an experienced advisor would be able to take advantage or change this conversation or change this thought process. Not talking about tax rates per se, but more talking about control. You know, the issue is we don't want income, we want after tax income. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're talking about. That single shift will reframe the whole goal of everything that we're talking about here today. That the focus isn't how much is coming in, it's how much stays. It's pretty simple, but difficult to be able to actually do. And where your tax risk really come from, y- the tax problems are really created by taking withdrawals reactively, waiting too long to plan distributions, letting your RMDs dictate strategy, and then also assuming that future taxes will somehow just magically sort themselves out. And none of that's intentional. The problem is that that just happens when there's no system in place. So, how you present this to the client is most retirement tax problems aren't caused by rates, they're caused by timing. Notice a lot of this that we've been talking about today is timing. Or another way to say it is that the IRS doesn't necessarily care about where the income comes from as much as it when it hits. So, what tax risk is really testing? It's not testing the tax code. It's testing whether a retirement plan has the income sources coordinated. If you're using timing strategically, managing the brackets intentionally, and also protecting future flexibility. Or taking a look at whether or not withdrawals happen based on convenience instead of design. So you want to make sure that your withdrawals are happening because of design, not convenience. So the bottom line on taxes is that they don't suddenly become a problem in retirement. They actually, and even more quietly, become more complex. Because without intentional planning, your clients will often discover it way too late, and unfortunately discover that they gave up more than they needed to. And tax risk itself is the stress test that will reveal whether retirement income is planned or improvised. And you don't want to improvise. So tax risk is number four. Number five, uh, risk is healthcare, LTC costs, and that is the unknown variable. Really, I mean, it's huge. It is the largest unknown expense in retirement, and it affects more than money itself. It affects choices. Your clients might be a little confused even to have the thought process that, oh, I'm not worried about that. Medicare will take care of that. Fortunately, that's not the case. Medicare doesn't cover long-term care, and a lot of these decisions, these care decisions, they will redirect your income fast, and these care decisions come very fast. within a blink of an eye. I've seen it time and time again. So how you talk about this with the client is that this isn't about expecting care. It's about protecting income if care is needed. When I first got in the industry, one of the very first opportunities I had was long-term care insurance. And I literally had a prospect tell me that it was because of long-term care policies. That's what was pushing so many people into these care facilities. Like he literally thought long-term care insurance was pushing people into long-term care facilities. So once again, it's not about expecting care as much as it is protecting your income if care is needed. And healthcare itself isn't a budget item. It's really a contingency plan. That's really what it is. It is planning against that risk. So what healthcare will stress test is the family's dignity, the family's independence, and the burden that the family may all of a sudden have. I mean, that healthcare is a family issue. It definitely impacts the individual, but it impacts the whole family. So that was number five. Number six, survivor risks. When two plans become one, especially with a married couple, that this is something that that this is the risk that most people don't understand definitely or don't test. Not because they don't because they're avoiding it. Not because they're avoiding it, but because they just assume it's already handled, right? Well, for example, what happens when one spouse dies? And most couples believe that answer is very simple. And we wish it were simple, but it's not because we've got the beneficiaries designated, we have life insurance, we have a will, we have a trust, we've got all that taken care of. So mentally, that those boxes are checked, right? But the survivor risk isn't about whether assets transfer. That's not what we're saying. It's about whether or not their retirement plan still works, whether their income plan still works, and how all of a sudden the household instantly becomes only one life instead of two. So I'm sure you've heard this a lot, that the common response from a client is, "Oh, we've already taken care of that." In many cases, they've probably done a good job on paper, but have they actually stress tested the outcome? Because that's a very risky assumption on their part. The survivorship itself immediately changes math. What does that mean? Well, when one spouse passes, a Social Security benefit, one of the checks may disappear. The other one may increase, but not to the full amount. Pension income may be reduced or totally gone. All of a sudden, tax brackets are different. Filing status changes. Medicare premiums increase. And then all of a sudden, now my risk tolerance drops. So I can't be as aggressive as I once was with my investments. And this is none of this really is talked about or shows up in the original planning conversation unless you are intentionally modeling this a part of the plan. So how you bring this up is and this is how you as an experienced advisor really slow this conversation down and put everything into perspective and bring real clarity. Retirement planning isn't one plan. It's two plans that eventually become one. Obviously, once again with a married couple. And that single sentence will really shift the focus from documents to outcome. Because the questions we're not talking about here is, will everything transfer at the death? That's not what we're saying. What we're trying to make sure that everyone understands and is very crystal clear is, does the surviving spouse still have stability, simplicity, and control? So how you ask that, how you position that is, if the survivor plan isn't tested, the plan isn't finished. Or a strong plan protects both lives, not just the household. So we got to make sure they have an understanding of there are two individuals here that have become one. So it's survivor risk isn't about testing investments. It's about whether or not the plan maintains income continuity at the death. Make sure that we manage tax exposure intentionally. Make sure that we simplify decisions during a stressful time. If you've been doing this a while, death of a spouse is one of the most overwhelming times in an individual's life. Very stressful. So, have we set up the plan to make sure that those decisions are as simple as they possibly can be in that time? Because we need to reduce the need for rushed choices during that time frame, especially when I'm so emotional. And then finally, the plan needs to be tested to make sure that we're able to help that individual preserve independence and dignity. Because as a surviving spouse, the last thing that you want in your life is complexity, right? You want clarity. You want that clarity to show up at the exact moment uncertainty has fallen in your life. So how can you have a leadership moment here? You're not going to treat this as a morbid topic. You're going to treat this as responsible planning. You're not going to assume, you're going to verify. Definitely don't avoid this conversation. Make sure it's a very structured one because survivor risk, when it's addressed early and clearly, what could have been and what will be a chaotic transition becomes a very manageable one. And that's the difference. If it's controlled and disciplined and as simple as possible, that plan that just transfers assets, that's cold. But a plan that truly protects the people, that's when people feel valued, and that's when you get referrals as well. That's when the family is so thankful for you being a part of their lives. And so let me show you where all of this really plays out in real life. Okay. I talked about the domino effect at the very beginning of this. So let's say we have a couple that retires at age 65. The one individual that the husband, let's say, is 3 years older, the wife. So he's 65. He retired. She works 3 more years because she's 62. So they don't retire at the same exact time. They retire at the age of 65. This one's younger and retires 3 years later. When she retires, the market dips early. She's experiencing sequence risk. He didn't, but she is. However, because of their income plan and how it's established, they have to pull the income anyways. At the same time, inflation increases. We now have inflation risk. At the same time, healthcare costs increase. We now have healthcare risk. 5 years later, one of the spouses passes away. We have survivor risk. All of a sudden, at the same time, our income now has dropped. Our taxes rise. We now have tax risk. The surviving spouse now has stretched the remaining years. She has lived much longer, and now we have longevity risk. There was not a single mistake there. Those were untested assumptions. That's not bad planning as much as it is incomplete planning. So a successful retirement, it's not about predicting the future. It's about preparing for uncertainty, right? The strongest plans out there stress test risk. They build adaptable income, definitely reduce regret, and protect both lives. And this is where an experienced advisor shines. Not by knowing the risk necessarily, but by leading the conversations around them. So if you're listening today and you really appreciate what you heard today and you would like a practical way to implement this as a part of your process, to be able to automatically implement it as a part of your client conversations, head out to my website, evolvewithgradient.com backslash ace team, evolvewithgradient.com backslash ace team, and request the retirement stress test framework, which is a simple advisor friendly system that will help you to identify all six of these risks clearly. Will definitely help you lead to better client conversations. The focus of this um, overall framework is to really create structure as opposed to overwhelm, and to be able to turn all of this insight into confident action, right? This is definitely built for experienced advisors who are looking for depth and not fluff. Well, once again, that's evolvewithgradient.com backslash ace team. And but before we wrap up, to all the advisors that are listening out there right now, I want to make sure that this is very clear that you don't hear this enough, and you will hear this from me on every single one of my shows. Thank you. Thank you for the responsibility that you carry. Often you carry that quietly. Thank you for the conversations that go beyond numbers and returns. Thank you for showing up when families need clarity, confidence, leadership, and ultimately, a majority of that time, they need it in the ugliest part of their life, one of the hardest times of their lives. You're not just managing money, right? You are managing uncertainty. You are helping people to make decisions that will shape the rest of their lives. That work really matters, and that will have an impact that will last far beyond any statements or performance report. That will last for generations. And so, if you're listening today, know this: that what you do is very meaningful, and the role that you play in your clients' lives is much bigger than most people see. This has been Unfiltered and Unstoppable. I'm Rob Romesburg. If this brought value to you, like the episode, follow the podcast, share it with another advisor, share it with your team. Make sure they have a greater understanding of these processes, and stay intentional, stay prepared, and keep building those plans that hold up even under pressure. We'll see you next time on Unfiltered and Unstoppable. As always, thank you for what you do.